The Science of Enlightenment, Session 2, on the Importance of Complete Experience.
Another physiological feature of the meditative state relates to the electrical activity in the muscles. There's something called an electromyograph, which measures what's going on in your muscles. If you look at the readout from the back muscles of an experienced meditator who has been sitting bolt upright for many hours, the muscles will appear to be as relaxed as the average person sleeping. So obviously some profound change is taking place in the physiology of the muscles to allow them to function and do a rather demanding activity, and yet at the same time be as relaxed as though they were asleep. This goes with that whole thing of the more efficient metabolism. Apropos of the brainwaves, there's one last thing I'd like to tell you. This was a piece of research that was a classic example of confirming the subjective report of a meditator with objective data. Zen meditators will tell you that when they sit and meditate, it seems like each moment is completely new and fresh, like they were just born that moment by moment. Well, it sounds nice, sounds sort of poetic and attractive, but that's just their subjective report. They could be making that up. It could be part of the party line to get people interested. There are certain changes in the brainwaves that take place whenever a new and fresh stimulus impinges on a person. And as soon as that new and fresh stimulus is repeated a number of times, those brainwave changes stop. Then another pattern appears that is characteristic of something that is not a new impact in the sensory field. When they did the brainwave study on Zen monks, what they did is they hooked the Zen monks up to an electroencephalogram. They hooked another group of people up who were not meditators but just sitting quietly up to a similar equipment. They introduced a click stimulus on a regular basis. When the click was first introduced, for the meditators and the non-meditators, the brainwave change that indicates a new stimulus took place. And after a few clicks, that change no longer took place in the non-meditators. But no matter how many times they made the click, the Zen monks registered it objectively with the brainwave pattern associated with a new stimulus. Now that's a very elegant experiment because it's absolutely objective. It's not based on somebody claiming a subjective experience. Well, it was things like that that got me intrigued in the whole aspect of how science could be used to explore and cross-fertilize with meditation. There are certain desirable physiological changes that take place in meditative states and are quite characteristic of them. This would seem to have an impact on health. I was told that on an average, they made some statistical studies and they found that, yes, indeed, the Zen masters in Japan did live quite a bit longer than the average person at whatever period of Japanese history they took the statistics. Some of these objective physiological changes seem to have something to do with health benefits. However, it's important to realize that meditating just for the health benefits would be a limited perspective on what meditation can bring. Another common misconception about meditation is that it involves a withdrawn state. It is true that in order to cultivate certain meditative skills, a person may spend periods of time, half hour here, a weekend there, a week over here, in states of silence and stillness. However, that is just to create an environment where optimal learning can take place due to the absence of distractions, even minor distractions, by sitting very, very still, one can learn much more effectively. And what has happened is, very unfortunately, because of the imagery of the person sitting perhaps with their eyes closed, silent, a certain archetype or preconception has spread into the general populace that looks upon meditation as this sort of autistic thing. So the most important thing to remember is that the meditation is something that can be cultivated, maintained, and applied in all life activities. And to get away from that stereotype that meditation is, in this funny posture, sitting on the floor, the eyes are closed, you have to burn incense and om. That's the image that you see of meditation in the mass media. Imagery is very powerful. That's an archetype. And that image, as I say, impacts so strongly that even when you explain to people very clearly what is involved in this practice, somewhere deep down in their subconscious, they still see it as a kind of withdrawal. A withdrawal from involvement in life, a withdrawal from involvement with other people. But of course, it is the diametric opposite of a withdrawal. Meditation is the skill of being fully present. Another common misconception about meditation is that it is a self-centered activity. Again, the imagery is impactful here. It seems like the person is sitting there just attending to themselves. So it seems selfish in some ways. So you might say that, to borrow the language of psychology, a lot of people look upon meditation as an autistic and narcissistic activity. It's autistic because you're withdrawn, okay, uninvolved, and it's narcissistic because you're just attending to yourself. You're just interested in yourself, your own subjective experience. In point of fact, in a sense, meditation is something a person does for themselves. But it is not only that. I have to laugh, actually, when I hear people say that, meditation is self-centered and selfish. If you think about it, every moment of just about everybody's life is self-centered. It's true, isn't it? The only non-self-centered moments come during lovemaking, perhaps. Every once in a while, there's a non-self-centered moment. Actually, there are many non-self-centered moments every day, but people aren't aware of them. It's always going on. We're always being drawn out of ourselves and merging with the outside world, but people aren't aware of it. What most people are aware of could be called a sequence of narcissistic experiences. That's the normal. The person that sits down and meditates may look very narcissistic. They've taken time away to be for themselves. But actually, they're starting to come out of the narcissism that is the norm of the world. But unfortunately, as I say, the imagery tends to give an erroneous impression. However, it is true, as I mentioned, that meditation is something that we do for ourselves, but that's not all that it is. So in what sense is meditation something that we do for ourselves? In what sense is meditation something that is more than for one's individual self? Well, obviously, since meditation enhances any life activity, we meditate for ourselves so that we can have this special strength, so that we can work more joyously, more effectively, we can perform better, we can enjoy our meal better, we can enjoy music more. There is this sort of elevation of pleasure in life. When you eat your meal, If you're meditative, it's going to be much more pleasant to you. There's two ways to have good meals. One is eat in gourmet restaurants. The other is learn to be fully focused with whatever is there. Of course, that's not to say you couldn't eat in gourmet restaurants and be fully focused with what is there. Have the best of both worlds. Sure, all of our life is going to be magnified by our meditative abilities, and that's for us as an individual. Meditation can help us learn to experience physical and emotional pain with diminished suffering. That's for us as an individual. Meditation can give us an internal microscope with which we can explore ourselves at a very deep level, a level unavailable to non-meditators. That's something we do for ourselves to understand ourselves better. Ultimately, meditation can allow us to have a happiness independent of conditions. And that is one heck of an awesome claim. What do we mean by conditions? Just about everything is dependent on conditions. One's health is a condition. One's reputation is a condition. One's financial situation is a condition. One's having food to eat is a condition. Having air to breathe is a condition. The ability to think is a condition. It can be taken away from one. And it will be taken away from many people. It's called Alzheimer's disease or senility. If we're making a claim that ultimately meditation can bring a person to a sense of happiness and fulfillment that is independent of conditions, well, this is an awesome claim. However, it is absolutely true. And ultimately, the thing that we do for ourselves in meditation is to come to that place of understanding, that state of consciousness, wherein our happiness is truly not dependent on conditions. You take away the health, you take away the wealth, you take away the reputation, you take away the air to breathe, you take away that person's ability to think, and they're still okay. My own personal experience is sort of interesting because I've actually experienced the ability to think being taken away from me chemically, in the sense that I don't have a thyroid gland. I have to take thyroid supplement every day. I was asked to be part of a study under very controlled conditions. I had to live in a hospital where I did not take my thyroid supplement for a while. They studied the metabolic pathways of the thyroxine, but they needed, basically, I just had to pee in a bottle, and not take my thyroid, so I could meditate or study or do whatever I wanted. It was a pretty good deal, and I agreed to it because they had helped me with my thyroid condition, so I'll be part of your experiment. And I was curious what would happen to my state of consciousness, because a person that doesn't have a thyroid, if they don't get their supplement, they develop a condition called myxedema madness. Basically, it's a form of senility. Your IQ drops way down, about 40, I would guess. Now, they can take you right to the edges of that state. So it's roughly, in some ways, equivalent to Alzheimer's disease. They can take you right to the edge of that, and the good thing is they can yank you back. As soon as you start taking the thyroid supplement, you recover from that state. That's what they did. They took me right to the edge of dementia and then pulled me back. I was able to prove to myself that the meditative state goes beyond the chemistry of the brain, the physical nature of the brain, at least to a certain extent. I suspect that if that time they had taken me further out, that maybe I wouldn't have been so happy. However, now, 15 years later, probably I could go a lot further out and still have my happiness be independent of conditions, including the condition that I know how to organize a thought. Because you can't think in that state. You don't know who you are. You don't know what's anything. The ultimate thing that meditation can do for the individual is show them how their happiness does not need to be dependent on conditions. Now you might wonder, it sounds like two things. It sounds extremely abstract. It sounds pretty audacious as a claim. Let me see if I can make that a little more tangible. When does a person have their happiness not dependent on a condition? Is whenever they are having a complete experience. Whenever you have a complete experience of something, the entire universe is present in that experience. Your individual identity is merged with, on one hand, the entire universe, and on the other hand, with the source of the universe. Any ordinary experience, like washing the dishes, when it is experienced completely, becomes absolutely extraordinary. The state that is beyond conditions is just whatever is happening, but experienced completely. The ultimate stage in the sequence of meditation deepenings comes when one starts to have during the day moments of complete experience. Inside a complete experience, time, space, self, and world, all of creation and the source of creation are all contained. Now I know that probably didn't make it much more tangible to you. Throughout this series, I'll be talking more and more in detail about such things, and hopefully it will be quite tangible to you by the time you've completed this series. Yes, indeed, part of meditation is something we do for ourselves. At many levels, including the ultimate level of transcending our limited identity. Most people, their identity is limited to their thoughts and feelings, their mind and their body. The thinking mind and the feeling body, that is the prison in which most people live. To transcend that limited identity so that the mind and body become a home that you can go in and out of rather than a prison that you're stuck in, that is another way to describe having complete experience or going beyond conditions. On one hand, meditation is something we do for ourselves, to have complete experience, to experience an identity larger than our thoughts and feelings. On the other hand, meditation is something that we do for others. The aspect of meditation that we do for others is absolutely of equal importance. In what sense is meditation something that we do for others? There is a basic pattern on this planet that underlies almost all of our problems, big or small, individual or global. But the pattern is so basic that most people aren't really aware of it. As the proverbial expression goes, they cannot see the forest because of the trees. People tend to be so locked into the specifics of situations that they don't see the big picture. But when you look back and look at the really big picture, what is the basic structure that underlies our individual and collective problems as human beings? The basic structure is as follows. An objective situation presents itself. Okay, that could be anything. Okay, an illness, a loss, a difficult interaction with another person. An objective situation presents itself. It impacts on our thoughts and feelings. Out of those thoughts and feelings, which are subjective, an objective response comes. We do something. We take action in one way or another. The problem is that very, very few human beings have much skill in dealing with their subjective experience. What do I mean by skill? I mean that very, very few human beings have the ability to experience anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment without suffering. And very, very few human beings have the ability to experience confusion without freaking out. So when a situation presents itself and it produces anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, confusion, we suffer. However, it is absolutely possible to experience anger, fear, sadness, confusion without suffering, to experience them completely. When we have a complete experience of physical or emotional pain, it doesn't cause suffering. It's a paradox. When we have a complete experience of confusion, it leads to an intuitive insight into things. It's a paradox. Complete experience is extremely paradoxical. But most human beings are not capable of having many conscious, complete experiences. When objective situations present themselves, it causes subjective states which are not experienced completely, therefore often turn into suffering. The salient feature of suffering is that it distorts behavior. You cannot perform the delicate act of threading a needle while at the same time somebody is holding a flame to your body. You can't do it. Your whole body shakes. The objective activity is distorted because of the suffering. In the same way, the delicate act of human interactions, human communications, is constantly subject to the distorting influences of subliminal suffering. Suffering that human beings are going through without even knowing they're going through it. So the responses are less than optimal, less than what they could be. What meditation allows is for us to have complete experiences, complete subjective experiences. Therefore, the suffering and therefore the distorting influence is then vastly reduced so that our responses become much more appropriately modulated, become more optimal to the situation. The responses are less than optimal. They sow the seeds for a new objective situation that's going to be a problem. And then, of course, we, as human beings, respond to that new situation, suffering, perhaps not even knowing it, and therefore have a less than optimal outcome from that situation. Now, often this cycle can just spin without getting out of control because the distorting influences are small. But those distorting influences can add up. In this culture, the norm is to go from passionate love to acrimonious divorce in just 5 or 10 short years. What happened? What happened? What happened was dozens and dozens of interactions daily. Some of them kind of neutral, some of them a little bit charged, some of them charged in big ways. The ones that were charged unpleasantly caused suffering. One responded to the situation with perhaps small or perhaps big distortions. But even if the distortions were small, they build up over time. The proverbial waxy buildup that they talk about in ads. Okay? Even though the distortions may be small, the responses are: one yells when one merely needs to be emphatic. One hits when one merely needs to yell. In the extreme cases, one kills where one merely needs to hit. Even if it's just a matter of subtle stuff, the tone in the voice, the quality of the body language. Forget about yelling or hitting. It builds up. That cycle builds up. It escalates, the proverbial vicious cycle. It is the buildup in that cycle that destroys a relationship here, a career there, that leads to an ethnic cleansing over here, or a dictatorship over there, a war over here, a famine over there. The basic pattern. When a person becomes proficient in meditation, they begin to pull out of that basic pattern. Situations arise, causes feelings. The feelings are complete in that moment. The responses are more appropriate than they would have been otherwise. The distortions don't build up. Life goes on as it was meant to go on. I started to meditate back in the 60s. The catchphrase was, "You're either part of the problem or the solution." It's a very good expression. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Of course, part of the solution meant to be politically correct. That may be part of being part of the solution, but there's something much more fundamental. Being part of the solution on this planet means snipping that cycle. By the way, that cycle has a name. That's called the law of karma. Snipping that cycle. And where do you snip it? Well, most people can't snip it because they just won't put in the time and effort needed to cultivate the subjective skills that are going to allow them to metabolize the subjective experiences that come from objective situations and therefore be able to respond more skillfully to the objective situations. Most people aren't willing to spend that amount of time. And then they wonder why things get so messed up individually and collectively. Like a woodcutter whose job it is to cut wood, sees the first tree, hacks away, sees the next tree, hacks away, refusing to spend 20 minutes each day to sharpen the axe, and then wonders why he can't cut as much wood as he should be able to, and wonders why it's such hard work, never realizing he's using a dull tool, a less than optimal tool. This is the general human condition if we want to look at the big picture. One of the things that meditation achieves for the others in our life is that it pulls us out of that cycle. There's more to it than that, though. I'll be talking further on about how not only does meditation allow us to stop being part of the problem, but it also allows us to start being part of the solution in the terms that it leads to the development of qualities in the Buddhist tradition are called metta and karuna, which means friendliness and compassion. On one hand, yes indeed, we do meditation for ourselves. Ultimately, we do it for ourselves so that we can have the relative happiness of enhanced pleasure and diminished suffering, and so that we can have the absolute happiness, which is the happiness independent of conditions. It comes about when we can experience a condition completely. On the other hand, equally importantly, we do meditation so that we can stop being part of the problem on this planet, at least to a certain extent, and so that we can start to be part of the solution. Now, of course, one might say, well, love, loving kindness, friendliness, compassion, if these are the ultimate goals, why bother with all of that hard work, developing concentration power, all the struggle and time that involves? Why not just start with the path of love and service right off the bat? The issue is one of optimization. If one only is involved in the path of love and service, this isn't a bad thing, but it's highly probable that one is going to be subject to burnout, one is going to be subject to disappointments. You try to help people and they bite the hand that feeds. What do you do? Ultimately, if one attempts to just practice the path of love, service, and compassion without at least some meditative work, one is likely to have one's activities of love, compassion, and service get distorted. Perhaps in small ways, perhaps in big ways. If you think about the history of religions, especially religions in the West, they start out with great ideas about being the path of love. Somewhere along the line, they end up involved in inquisitions, crusades, persecutions, jihads, pogroms. In the name of what? In the name of God's love. When we look back at it, of course, it seems so perverse, so obviously perverse. How did it happen? How did it happen? It's exactly the same mechanism that was present in our individual life that in 5 years, 10 years, leads a person from passionate love to acrimonious divorce. But this is just a bigger pattern over longer periods of time involving more people, over decades, centuries, involving populations, ethnic groups. Same pattern though. You start out with your religion is a path of love, and amazingly, you can end up torturing the children of heretics because of an inability to be objective about your own thoughts and feelings, your own belief system, and the anger, fear, sadness, etc. that may come about when people aren't quite willing to accept your version of love. The reason for meditating is to lessen those kinds of effects and to optimize our taking care of conditions, individual conditions of our life and collective conditions of our community, our family, our planet. We can say, by way of summing up, that the ultimate goal of meditation is twofold. One is that it allows us to have a happiness independent of conditions and circumstances. And the other is that it gives us a perspective from which we can optimally respond, take care of conditions and circumstances.